Marc, he's the senior principal researcher at RAND and holds a distinguished chair in statistics. I hope you're not holding it right now, Marc. But I look back, the last time he spoke with us was about 8 years ago. On April 20th, he talked about case mix adjustment of patient evaluation and care measures. So it's good to have him back. But the one thing I'll say, I've worked with Marc for several years, and he's led the CMS Medicare CAHPS project. It says since 2006, which is amazing. It's been that long. And he's one of the greatest colleagues to work with. And also, if you don't know already, he's one of the most prolific and highly cited researchers in the world. So we really are honored to have him talk about CMS work again today. So take it away, Marc. Thank you.
That's really kind, Ron, and I should say that there's nothing that I'm talking about today that I would be doing if in 1995 Ron hadn't shown me how interesting it was to work in patient experience, and I likewise am incredibly grateful to having been able to work with Ron all these years. I'm gonna so the first slide is just the topic of this talk. Next slide, please. So as an outline of what I'm going to try to talk about today, I'm going to provide just some brief background on CAHPS. I'm going to borrow some material that Jess Maxett from CMS and Stephen Martino from RAND put together originally for an ARC conference on using CAHPS for health equity. I'll also be sharing a bit from my own presentation, and then just a few things that I put together recently kind of on this topic. I'm going to be talking about how CMS, including their Office of Minority Health, has tried to use these CAHPS surveys to improve health equity. I'll talk about some of the findings, and also sort of a related subject about how do you make sure that you hear from everybody in the first place, since this is a survey-based measure, and you really can't necessarily improve equity unless you're doing a good job at hearing from everybody that the healthcare system is supposed to serve. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview of CAHPS. So it's the most widely used and most extensively researched system of patient experience surveys. It's by its nature focused on patient-centered care, and it's always been conceived of as a way of trying to measure the aspects of quality of healthcare for which patients are the best or only source. And when you think about health equity in particular, this is always going to be an important dimension of that. And there are a lot of things that you can measure without talking to patients, but here the focus is on those aspects of health equity that really require talking to patients. So the ARC led the original development of the CAHPS surveys and remains actively involved in developing and improving those. At some point, CMS started administering CAHPS surveys in a variety of settings, sort of moving towards public reporting and attaching those to incentive payments to try to provide mechanisms to improve the quality of care. Within Medicare, you see this administered for Medicare Advantage plans, for ACOs, for hospitals, for hospices, home health agencies. Next slide, please. So the next question might be sort of what are the characteristics of patients where it's possible to to use CAHPS surveys to assess disparities and inequities. And the starting point is generally going to be the self-reported data that exists for patients. And if you're familiar with CAHPS surveys, there's typically an about you section of demographics at the end of the survey, and a lot of information is gathered there. Some of these variables are gathered from administrative records, depending on the CMS implementation. Others you directly ask the patients, but it's pretty common to ask race and ethnicity, preferred language, education, age, currently sex, but there's a rapid movement towards measuring sexual orientation and gender identity. Depending on the particular survey or the administrative files that are linked to it, you might also know other things that are linkable. Might be dual eligibility for Medicaid, which can be a proxy for SES, as well as medical need, sometimes disability information, sometimes information about urban and rural residents. All these things are going to differ a little bit from survey to survey because there are differences in how these are collected. So, for example, MA and fee-for-service CAHPS is collected off of a sample frame that CMS administrative files, so lots of information. HCAHPS about hospitals is submitted to CMS in a way where it's anonymous and not directly linkable to external sources. So there's a little bit of a variation there. Next slide, please. I'm going to next turn to some information about how CMS's Office of Minority Health conceives of the Medicare Advantage CAHPS measures for their purposes. Next slide, please. This slide, which comes from CMS, notes the priority that they give to ensuring high quality and equitable care to all people served by CMS, irrespective of all the characteristics that are listed here. And the second part of the slide notes the CMS's framework for health equity. And if this is of interest, there's good information on their website about this. But they're very much interested in supporting the collection, reporting, and analysis of standardized data, including CAHPS data. And they also then sort of take that data and have a fairly organized system of trying to then lead to improvements in the gaps and inequities that they uncover. Next slide, please. So one of the major initiatives that they began was quite some time ago, actually, though it's gotten increased prominence recently, is stratified reporting of quality measures by key characteristics. And so they began, and I should say as an aside, they do this not just for CAHPS measures of patient experience, but also for other measures like measures of clinical quality. They began by focusing on stratified reporting by race and ethnicity, and I should say what I mean by stratified reporting. So, say the way a CAHPS survey, a CAHPS health plan survey, like the Medicare CAHPS survey was originally designed, was with the aim of reporting the overall quality for that plan for all the people enrolled in it. But one of the concerns that arose is it might be the case that the quality differs substantially depending on personal characteristics. And so the idea of being able to report, for example, just on the Hispanic members of a plan, or just the Black enrollees of a plan, or the Black patients in a hospital, became important to CMS. And so so both stratified reporting at the national level and stratified reporting within individual plans, for example, became a priority. They began by doing this with respect to race and ethnicity, and this has expanded over the years. They've had interest in differences by sex, by urban and rural residents, by characteristics that include disability, dual eligibility for Medicaid, and often intersections of these characteristics. And so if you're interested in some of the findings, you can go to their website and see some of these reports that are produced every year, and the scope and quantity of these have expanded. Next slide, please. They also link all of this to a technical assistance program that's equity focused, and the idea here is that that once a plan learns, for example, that they're not doing particularly well, for example, with one segment of their membership, it tries to link them to evidence and assistance that'll help them do that better. Next slide, please. I'm now transitioning to the third section of my remarks, and here I'm going to talk. I'm going to summarize some of the material that Stephen Martino at RAND developed, which outlines some of the work that he and I have done for CMS with respect to race and ethnicity and patient experience. Next slide, please. So, as I've kind of outlined before, the goal of this, was to both at a national level and also kind of at a more specific level, look at racial and ethnic differences in quality, both patient experience and otherwise, and the fact that this has been done year after year also makes it possible to identify trends and progress and backsliding when that occurs. What I'm going to be talking about here will be mainly the national level information, but there's also downloadable data that occurs at the plan level as well. Next slide, please. So the first, so there's information with respect to a number of characteristics that's presented. Here, for the moment, I'm going to focus on race and ethnicity, and I'll talk a little bit about how race and ethnicity is measured by self-report on the CAHPS surveys, and how that's used by CMS right now. So there are two items that typically appear regarding race and ethnicity in the CAHPS survey. The first is a check all that apply race item, and the second is an Hispanic ethnicity item, and those are then used to develop classifications, and there are various ways that you can do this. The way that this work for CMS is currently organized involves a 6-category classification, whereby anybody who endorses Hispanic ethnicity is in an Hispanic category. Anybody who endorses exactly one one race, but who doesn't endorse Hispanic ethnicity is in that category. And anybody who endorses 2 or more races but not Hispanic is in the multiracial category, with the exception that for now, people who endorse the exact combination of Asian American and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander are in a joint Asian American and HPI category. These classifications were sort of informed in part by sample size considerations, and there are other valid ways of doing this, and this is an active area of interest in research. But I'll just note that this is the way that a lot of the work right now is organized. Next slide, please. So one of the the heuristic that we've used for national reporting is any case where we have at least 400 observations, we report without qualification. Ones that have sample sizes of less than 100, we don't currently report, and then ones that are in between, we report, but flag them as potentially imprecise. I'll also note that if you're familiar with CAHPS surveys, the items tend to fall into, the evaluative items tend to fall into one of 2 broad categories. There are 0 to 10 global measures, like rate the care that you've received on a scale from where 0 represents the worst possible care and 10 represents the best possible care, or similar items about your specialists or your personal physician. And then there are other items that are more specific. For example, asking whether the side effects of a new medication were explained in a way that you were able to understand. And these sort of more specific items often use an always, usually, sometimes never response scale. And I'm going into all this because the 0 to 10 ratings are ones that show a lot of variation with regard to scale use by race and ethnicity. So much so, and this is something that we've learned from vignette studies, where we show similar care scenarios to different groups, and the differences in use of the 0 to 10 rating scale are such that in general we've not recommended the use of 0 to 10 items when the purpose is comparisons by race and ethnicity. And so all these reports focus on not these global ratings, but rather the more specific items that often show up in the form of composites. There are, I may not have time to get into this. There's some sort of further issues of scale use that can occur on the basis of some vignette studies regarding differences between scale use for Asian American and HPI respondents that may also apply to some of the always to never scales as well. But by and large, those response scales are the ones that work better for comparisons by race and ethnicity. So the comparisons that we show are adjusted for standard CAHPS case mix variables. These are characteristics like age, for example, that seem to affect how people use response scales, but not be under the control of those providing care. And when we put together these the longitudinal reports in particular, we tend to focus on measures that have CAHPS measures that have had a stable definition and phrasing over time in their CMS implementations. So in turning to the next slide, you'll see the 7 measures that were examined. Some of these measures are like getting needed care and doctor communication are measures that have been part of CAHPS surveys for a very long time. Others, like the items about care coordination and prescription drugs have been are sort of more recent adaptations to specific settings. And then the flu vaccination measure isn't really a CAHPS measure per se, but we sometimes include it in this context because it's often gathered on CAHPS surveys. The next slide describes some of the findings from one of our recent reports. This is a trend report. This report considered race, ethnicity, sex, rurality, and it looked at these measures that I just described over a 10-year period, ending shortly in a couple years before the start of the COVID pandemic, and there are we found both good news and bad news when we took this sort of long 10-year view. One of the disappointing things was that first of all, getting needed care declined for everybody over this period, but getting needed care declined particularly for Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander enrollees in Medicare Advantage plans. So this is a case where unfortunately there was some where inequities were getting worse. On a more optimistic note, there were 4 measures in the set that tended to improve for overall, but particularly improved for Black members of Medicare Advantage plans, and this was particularly encouraging because these were all 4 of these measures showed marked inequities in 2009, and 2 of these gaps closed entirely over this period, and then the 2 largest ones were reduced by a third. You can also see that there was some substantial progress over this period in some of the gaps that initially existed between Hispanic and white enrollees. There wasn't much change with respect to male-female differences. There also weren't terrifically large male-female differences to begin with. And then the flu vaccine has been, even though not a CAHPS measure, has been of real interest because there have been some really dramatic differences in immunization, and some of these gaps have really narrowed, including a difference between rural and urban residents that was quite large in 2009 and was eliminated by 2018. So I guess I would say briefly here that that there's been sort of more progress than backsliding, but there certainly have been things going in the wrong direction, and even where things are heading in the right direction, there certainly are gaps and disparities that remain. The next slide talks about one of the things that we've been moving towards. And so initially, all of our work used the non-Hispanic white group as the point of reference for racial and ethnic comparisons. We've recently reoriented everything towards using national averages as the point of reference for all groups. And you know, there's a little bit of algebra involved in doing that, but you know, we've started to become fans of this approach. So one of the reasons for doing this is conceptual, and we think another advantage is empirical. So there's you know, there's a desire to avoid the idea that that larger or historically more advantaged groups are normative, but also one of the nice things about especially if you're looking at things like race and ethnicity and urban and rural residents and SES-based measures all kind of at the same time, is it kind of allows a common standard of how far above or below a national average a given group is. And so in a lot of ways, it really facilitates comparisons. In all this work for CMS, we've used joint criteria of both statistical significance and also practical significance. And for the most part, the practical significance criterion that we have used has been a difference of 3 points on a 0 to 100 scale, which is described as a moderate difference in a 2018 article by Denise Quigley. Next slide, please. So here you see an extract of one of the exhibits from one of our reports. And so for each of these 6 racial and ethnic groups, we've compared them to the national average. And so just pick out 2 examples. The scores for Asian American NHPI were below the national average for 6 measures and above for 1. The scores for Hispanic members of MA plans were similar to the national average for 5 measures and below average for 2. You might notice that there are not many instances of being significantly above the national average, and that's in part because we've got a magnitude criterion. So the scores are highest on average for the white group, but the white group doesn't differ from the overall national average by an appreciable amount for any of those measures. Next slide, please. Here's a comparison where you take these same racial and ethnic comparisons to the national average, and then you stratify them by urban and rural residents. And so here, the point of reference, I should say, in the urban chart on the left is the national average for everybody who lives in an urban area. And then the point of reference in the right chart is the national average for everybody who lives in a rural area. And one of the bits of potential value here is that where there are differences, you can see that there might be opportunities for more efforts or for possibly lessons learned. So if you look at Hispanic members of MA plans as an example, you can see that Hispanic MA enrollees have experiences that are broadly similar to the national average in urban areas, but are markedly below the national average for 4 out of 7 measures in rural areas. And so in some sense, you can sort of unpack that overall pattern to realize that there may be a particular need to focus on rural areas. In contrast, if you look at the Asian American NHPI group, they're although the picture is still negative, the patterns are actually more positive in rural than urban areas. So this is just an example of some of the kind of multiple stratification that CMS does to try to understand and improve these differences. Next slide, please. Likewise, this is another example of stratification. Here, the first graph on the left is comparing each racial and ethnic group among female members of plans to the national average for all female MA enrollees. And then the one on the right, same thing for male MA enrollees. And here you can see, for example, that multiracial enrollees have similar to national experiences among males, but female multiracial enrollees in MA plans have notably worse experiences than the national female average for 3 of the 7 measures that we looked at.
Mark, are we on the right slide?
I'm so sorry. Let me check. Sorry. It looks like the slide didn't advance to the female. I apologize. I probably failed to say that. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. I think I got my count off because of the build. Thanks for interrupting. So let's. I'm going to advance the slide that's showing now, which is the slide that says getting needed care by race and ethnicity within sex. So what you've seen so far is sort of a summary across all the measures. These reports also provide more specific information for each of these measures. So suppose that we want to look at just the measure getting needed care, and we're looking at racial and ethnic comparisons to the national average within sex. Then let me describe what you're looking at here. So the horizontal line that you see up top is the national average, and so you can see the national average for getting needed care on the 0 to 100 scale for female respondents, also for male respondents, and in this case they're extremely similar, which is why the blue and red horizontal bars are so similar to one another. The bars that correspond to each racial and ethnic group show the mean for each group within each of those within the female and male strata, and the triangles indicate where there's a statistically significant difference, and you can also see the confidence intervals that exist for each of the bars, and you can see an example for the American Indian Alaskan Native male estimate of something that's flagged for having lower precision. Next slide, please. And you can see here, how this similar graphs for getting needed prescription drugs and for the annual flu vaccine, and maybe in the interest of time, I'll move on to the slide that states the conclusions in this section. So we found that it's often the case that looking at some of these characteristics in combination can help identify sort of more specific and actionable patterns, and also the ways that we look at this have changed over time and are likely to do so moving forward. Why don't I pause at this point because I see that we're sort of more than halfway through our time, and take a couple of questions on this initial material before continuing with a few more things that might be of interest.
So no one has a question?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So this is Carlos. I was wondering if you knew, Mark, if CMS plans to collect disaggregated data for Asian American enrollees in Medicare CAHPS. I've actually used the disaggregated data from Medicaid CAHPS, but it's kind of outdated from 2014 to 2015.
So I suspect that there will be so I suspect that there will be a move at some point towards disaggregated data by specific Asian origin, national origin, in addition, for example, Chinese alone, in addition to splitting the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander group from the Asian American group. At a national level, the sample size and power is quite good, at least for main effects, if you will, of race and ethnicity. The sample sizes can get thinner when you cross-tabulate with other characteristics, but I think there's potential and interest there. I should also say that we're moving towards an ability to try to do that for in the clinical measures as well. So I suspect that is a direction that's coming. For individual hospitals, individual health plans, there'll be some that will be able to develop precise estimates in finer gradations, and then others that won't. But I think there's a lot of potential for that, especially at higher levels of aggregation geographically.
Thank you.
So what about language, primary language spoken?
So different CAHPS surveys collect information about language spoken in different ways. My own preference is for some of them only collect information about survey language, whereas and others such as CAHPS collect information on your preferred language spoken at home, the version that Ron described, and the latter is very much what I prefer for multiple reasons. One is it sort of it tells you something about what the language that people wanted to be able to use, and that has that sort of has broader reach than just the language that was selected for a particular survey, but it also has a lot of implications for monitoring health plans and hospitals and making sure that people who prefer to be surveyed in a particular language are, there's maybe I'll take the second question as a cue to move forward and talk about a few more things that we found, because I do think there's a lot of evidence that right now preferred language is predictive of differences in experience, even within race and ethnicity. So I'm on the next slide, please. That's a section header, and here I tried to really briefly condense some of the papers that I've been aware that have looked at this data, at CMS CAHPS data in various ways. Next slide, please. So here I talk about sort of 4 areas where there's been let's see, I think, sorry, one slide back, please. Yep, here, okay. So one area that there's been some research is developing health equity measurement schemes like the health equity summary score, and there have been a couple papers that are on a bibliography I circulated that look at how you might use hospital CAHPS or MA CAHPS scores in equity reporting schemes. And in various versions of this, we look at patterns by race and ethnicity, by language, by dual eligibility. There have been a lot of articles that have looked at racial and ethnic differences in various settings, and at variation in those differences by things like the composition of a hospital or plan's patient population, residential segregation in an area, and so forth. We've looked at variations in key driver analyses by race and ethnicity to try to make inferences about the highest priorities for care for different groups of patients. We have also used CAHPS data to try to look at more nuanced ways that you might measure multiracial identity rather than just having a catch-all category. Next slide, please. There's been some work looking at differences by language preference, often finding that a preferred language other than English is associated with worse care within racial and ethnic groups, perhaps because of insufficient availability of staff who speak a patient's preferred language. We've looked at variation by sex in various settings, and we've also looked at the extent to which different forms of coverage, different plan types, different hospital types show different patterns of disparities. And then also more recently, we've looked at some age-based differences in hospitals. Next slide. And then next slide again. Maybe I'll close while also trying to leave some time at the end for questions with a couple of comments about trying to improve the participation of diverse populations in these surveys. Next slide. So one of the challenges is a lot of the very groups that are underserved by the healthcare system also are the same groups that have lower survey responses. And while male only surveys aren't always poor performing in general, they're often poor performing with a lot of the groups that have lower response rates in general, and often a lot of the groups that are underserved by the healthcare system. Relative to male only, telephone-based approaches tend to do better for many of the groups mentioned here, though not so much with the Asian American NHPI group. And there are both there are many reasons for wanting to address this. One is, of course, the obvious reason that you want to fully capture the experiences of groups that are being underrepresented. And you also really can't adequately track your progress in doing so without better representation of such groups. But it's also the case that even if you didn't have health equity specific interests, that improving the representation of underrepresented groups improves the whole measurement effort. Next slide, please. So here's an example of what you see right now on the Medicare CAHPS surveys. This is a survey that has it's mail with telephone follow-up of non-respondents. And so if you take the mail column and phone column and add them up, you'll get the overall response rate. And you can see that this survey in 2021 during the pandemic got about a 37% response rate for white respondents, but much lower response rates for a number of other groups. So you can see about 10 percentage points lower for Black respondents. You can see also considerably lower for Spanish preferring Hispanic respondents, for example. But one of the interesting things that you'll note is that because of differences in mail and phone preference, the absolute response rate for Black Medicare enrollees, for example, was more than twice as high as for white Medicare enrollees. And so there's both an overall gap in response rates that needs to be fixed. But even this example using current practices shows that what survey mode you use matters, and matters differently for different groups. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to spend a little bit more time talking about a recent mode experiment, a randomized experiment done in CAHPS, the hospital CAHPS survey. Next slide, please. So this is this was conducted in the second half of 2021, based on 36,000 patients, more than half of whom supplied email addresses to their hospital. Next slide, please. We tested 6 different modes: a mail-only approach, a phone-only approach, a mail-phone approach that is kind of like the one I just described in Medicare, and then 3 different approaches that began with web then mail, web then phone, and then a 3-phase approach, web, mail, phone. Next slide, please. These are the response rates that we got overall, and you can see that some of the pattern here is sort of the more phases, the better. So mail only by itself, phone only by itself got the lowest response rates. Any of the things that involved 2 approaches got between a 29 and a 31% response rate, and then web, mail, and phone together got a 36% response rate. So so the web clearly helps. So web mail is doing better than mail only. Web phone is doing better than phone only. But this is just the overall pattern, and we haven't yet really looked at getting at some of the underrepresented groups. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'm gonna move forward to the next slide, and I'm gonna try. And so if we look at, we can't calculate response rates by race and ethnicity here because we don't know race and ethnicity until people respond. But because of randomization, you can compare yields because we know that randomization ensures that on average the number of, for example, Black patients in each mode was the same. Any mode that yields more responses from Black patients must result in a higher response rate for Black patients. So we find that this web, mail, phone had the highest yield for 3 out of 5 racial ethnic groups. And then when that wasn't the best, the highest or the second highest was always one of these two-phase modes. And male only was the worst possible mode for Black, Hispanic, and multiracial patients. Phone only was the worst possible mode for white patients, and those two modes tied as worst for Asian American NHPI patients. So the good news is that in addition to the fact that these web first modes did better overall, they were particularly helpful for the groups that have the lowest response rates, and the gains from these multi-mode approaches were often 2 or 3 times as large for Asian American NHPI, Black, Hispanic, and multiracial patients compared to white patients. Next slide, please. The first column shows the fraction of all respondents who fell into each of these categories. So it's the first column basically tells you that if you use a male only approach, you'll get 2.4 Black respondents for every 100 total surveys that go out, and we don't know of those 100 people how many of them were Black, for example. But what we can see is that the number of responses you get from Black patients is 75% higher in web mail phone than it is in mail only, and that's the number of responses you get from white patients, for example, increases by 1/3 relative to mail only, which is great. But if you look at that last column, you can see that the gains that you get for other groups are considerably larger. And so, the sort of briefly, the good news here is that these methods that increase response rates overall also really help close some of the gaps in underrepresented and underserved groups. Next slide. We also briefly found that another way you can improve the equity of representation is by increasing the length of data collection or field periods. Among other things, there's evidence that in CAHPS that the last people to respond are often people who had the worst experiences. And unfortunately, that often includes racial and ethnic minority respondents. And so, we found that last week in a 49-day field period compared to the sort of current standard of 42 days brought in more racial and ethnic minority respondents, more respondents who preferred another language to English, so in addition to response rate gains, they're disproportionate gains to representation as well. Next slide. So I think rather than describing the conclusions, let me stop at this point and ask if there are other questions in the small amount of time that we have remaining. And apologies for oversliding.
Hi, if I can jump in, this is Luisa Blanco. Great work. Is there a report out there that kind of summarizes a lot of the information here that we can use as a resource, or?
Yeah, two things. I can point you to some of the reports by CMS, and then I also sent a bibliography of some of the with DOI links to a lot of the research papers that have been referred to briefly.
Okay, that would be a great resource. And then I'll just ask a question on, considering gender-related questions in the future so that we learn more, in a more inclusive way, right? I mean, right now we're only seeing females and males, right?
That's right. So the it might not surprise you to learn that the interest in more broadly measuring sex orientation and gender identity is different under the current HHS administration than the prior one.
Of course.
And so there's been rapid interest in developing and testing those items at ARC, at CMS, and I think that for the most part that information isn't out there on these surveys right now because it hasn't yet been collected, but there's been a lot of excellent and rapid work in developing measurement standards for SOGI, and I think that's very much coming. I'll also say if you're interested in patient experience in a UK context, there are a few articles about that that bring in sexual orientation and then more recently gender identity in UK patient experience surveys. But I think the US is not far behind, and there's a lot of consensus in making that happening.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, moving into that direction. Thank you.
Mark, I didn't have a question. I just had a comment. I really wanted to thank you for the presentation, and it's really great to see how you and your colleagues have been and continue to use the approach to race and ethnicity, the methodology, the data, presentations, et cetera, stratified analyses, some of the imputations. So it's great to just see people, leading the path and undertaking this work and with such level of detail.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you.
And it was great, the move toward overall average, which, to have a sense of what the average of everybody is, and then how different groups may compare to that, rather than, as you said, assuming there's one normative group, whatever that group may be for a given condition, and always using that as the reference. Or, yeah, I'll leave it.
I see we're almost at the end of our time, but happy to answer another question if there is one.
When are you coming back?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and happy to to answer other questions or that come up, and point you to some of the reports and resources that that we're aware of, thanks again to Ron and all of you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was great.
Thank you.